Shavuot Tov, Parashat Bechukotai, an orthodox Jew who observes the commandments and accepts the Torah's viewpoint on many societal and personal issues may find themselves in uncomfortable circumstances when in debate with those who are far from that way of life and who come with a very, very different point of view on most everything. How is the Orthodox Jew to relate to these situations where we are sometimes frankly met with scorn and called primitive and other names? And this is nothing new. We've been scorned and called primitive throughout history, and yet here we still are. So, first of all, for ourselves, we should have no doubts about the eternal truths of the Torah. Nonetheless, how do we keep the stiff upper lip when we are so attacked and maligned in the current world, which rejects a lot of what we hold to be true and dear? A hint to this might be in the parsha that we read today, because the parsha has the dual section of the blessings and the curses. The curses is also known as the tochicha or the rebuke. briefly stated, the Torah starts with the blessings. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and so forth and so on, things will go well. You'll have rain in its season. Food will be plentiful. You will have no fear. You will have your temple, and God will accept your service, and you will defeat your enemies. You'll go out to fight them, and they will flee from you in 7 directions, and so forth and so on. It's fairly short, fairly concise, and fairly wonderful if we keep those things. But if not, then the Torah says, well, this'll happen, that'll happen. There'll be illnesses, there'll be diseases, there'll be war, there'll be fear, there'll be starvation and famine and this problem and that problem and so forth and so on. And we have a rebuke like that twice in the Torah. Once is in the book of Leviticus, which we read today, and once is in the book of Deuteronomy. The one in the book of Leviticus is relatively short, and it comes to a clear end. It ends when the Israelites, the Torah tells us, will confess their sins. God will remember his covenant with the patriarchs, and the exile will end. It's a clear ending, and it's relatively short. However, the second rebuke, which is found in the book of Deuteronomy in the chapter of Kitavo, is much longer, much scarier, even more seemingly disconnected problems, dangers, punishments, whatever. And it doesn't end, it just stops. It's the last verse of that rebuke is simply, you'll be taken to the land of your enemies in ships, and you'll be sold there for slaves, but no one's going to buy. The end. That's not exactly the most uplifting message. So why is it that rebuke is much longer and doesn't end, it just stops, whereas the one we had today is shorter and it does end? So there are those who say, the Ramban among them, that there were 2 main exiles in the history of the Jewish people. One was the Babylonian exile after the destruction of the first temple in the year 586 before the Common Era, and that exile lasted 70 years. So since it was a short exile and it had a clear end, we returned and we rebuilt the temple. Excuse me. That would be the Tochicha that we read today, which was short and has a clear end. However, the Roman exile after the destruction of the temple in the year 70, that one still is going on, even though we are now seeing, we hope, the rays of redemption. Nonetheless, the exile technically is still in place. There is no temple. The majority of Jews are not yet in Israel, although that's changing fast. And so since that exile goes on and on and on, so the one in Deuteronomy is very long, and it doesn't end, it just stops. I'd like to also explain it on the basis of what the prophet says, that God said that about the redemption, Be'ita achishena, in its proper time I will bring it quickly. That seems to be a contradiction. If it's in its proper time, it's not quickly. And if it's quickly, then it should be before its proper time. So what does that mean? The rabbis say, it depends. Zachu, if we deserve it and merit it, if we repent and do good deeds, so then achishena, then the redemption will come early. And I think that's this week's parsha, where the parsha ends with us doing exactly that, repenting and confessing our sins, and God then remembers his covenant and brings us back in, to the land. However, lo zachu, if we do not merit it, so then the redemption will only come when the appointed time has come. And therefore, that second toichecha, the second rebuke, it doesn't end, it just stops, because basically the time has come. All of the arrows have been fired from the quiver, and then the redemption will happen nonetheless. we hope to hasten the redemption through our good deeds. But relating our question at the beginning about how does the Orthodox Jew present him or herself in a world that may be hostile to a lot of the values that we hold, I think we can answer that and understand that, or gain strength from the fact that the blessings in this week's Parsha are short and concise and powerful, but the rebuke is long, and even though not as long as the one in Kitavo in Deuteronomy, still long, and it seems to be completely disjointed and disconnected. This will happen. There'll be a disease, and that will happen. There'll be enemies, and you'll be afraid, and there'll be a famine, and the land will rejoice about the fact that or will become appeased by the fact that you're not there because it'll have its sabbaticals that you didn't observe. All kinds of different things which seem to be disconnected. How do we understand that? It seems to be a little bit unfair. There's a lot more rebuke than there is blessing. Give us more blessing. Generally speaking, the Torah stresses the good rather than the negative. So why is the negative so prominent, and especially in Deuteronomy where it's even longer? So I think there are two key words in the rebuke that we need to focus on. One of them is the word keri. Keri comes from the root of mikre. It's the root of mikre, which means random. Randomness. In other words, if we go, says God, in a random manner with God, and we'll have to see what that means, so then God will act randomly with us, and random problems and travails will come to the Sonehem Shel Yisrael, as the rabbis would say, to the enemies of Israel, which is a euphemism. So if it's random. But then, the Tochacha also includes a lot of the number 7. I will punish you sevenfold. What is the number 7? 7 is a number of order, which is the opposite of random. Because 7 is the 7 days of the week, 6 days of work and 1 day of Sabbath, 7 years, 6 years of work and 1 year of sabbatical. So 7 is order and structure. And keri, which is random, is the absence of order and structure. So what exactly is going on here? Why is there 7 and keri at the same time? So I think that if you look at anything that has holiness connected to it, there is something surprising about it. For example, in the end of the Parsha, we read about the tithe of animals. The 10th animal is dedicated to be sanctified. Why the 10th animal? Why not the first animal? Right? You count 9 animals that are not holy, and the 10th one is going to be holy. So too it is with the Sabbath. We don't sanctify the first day, which I would think that we would, because we sanctify the first day to God, we dedicate it to God, and then everything follows is coming from with the shadow of that holiness of God, if you will. But no, we do first 6 days of work, and then the 7th becomes holy. The same thing with the sabbatical year. There have to be 6 years of labor, and then the 7th year is the sabbatical year. Why is it that the Holy One comes at the end? Well, I think this is part of the nature of the world, that we do things, we create things, we work things. And then when we're done, we have to put an understanding and a perspective on what is it that we have created. For example, when a person stands, there are 6 points in every direction. There's north, south, east, west, up, and down. 6 discrete points, each one in its own direction. The question is, do we then say that everything is random, those points have no connection to each other? Or is there structure? And what is the structure? The structure is God. God is the point in the middle from which all those 6 points emanate. So it is our job, our challenge, to create those 6 points, but then to unify them by putting that middle point in place, by putting God at the center, by observing the Sabbath. I think I mentioned in last week's video that we earn the right to proclaim the festivals, that we earn the right to deal with matters of the heavens, with the sanctification of the new moon, and proclaim the festivals by observing the Sabbath, which we have no say in. The Sabbath is God's determination. And every time the Torah tells us the festivals, it starts off by mentioning the Sabbath, because the road to the festivals goes through the Sabbath, if we can prove. So how do we earn the right to sanctify festivals? Because we have earned, by keeping the Sabbath, we have proven, rather, that we know how to put the central point. We know how to connect all of the things that we do in this world to holiness, to God. And once we have proven that time and time again, we then earn the right to proclaim the festivals. And the same thing with the 6 years and the sabbatical, which God proclaims the sabbatical. But after 7 cycles of the sabbatical, we can proclaim the Jubilee year. Same concept. We have 6 years of work, and we could say, it's my power, my strength. I don't have to sanctify anything. I can keep working. But no, we stop in that 7th year, put that point in the middle and connect all of it to holiness. And through doing that 7 times, we then earn the right to declare our own sabbatical, the Jubilee year, which is a very special thing. So the word 7 implies structure. And therefore, what do we see from this? That the nature of the world is that the Torah and the mitzvot should be observed. God, say the rabbis, looked in the Torah and created the world. There's a verse in the blessings that says that the enemies will fall before us to the sword. And Rashi, the commentator, says they will fall not according to the way of the world. What does that mean? It means, I think, that we are living the natural way of life, that the Torah perspective is the natural way to be. Observing the commandments, this is the true nature and order and structure, the 7 of the world. And the nations of the world who don't have that, who live lives of randomness, lives of pursuing every temporary and fleeting attraction, they are not according to the nature of the world. But says God, if you will abandon the Torah and will walk with me, carry in a random fashion, erasing that central point, chasing whatever fad is in fashion at any given point in time or place, then I, God, will show you that the consequence of that, not even the punishment, the consequence of living a random life is a random world, and a random world is a dangerous one, where there could be diseases and wars and enemies and famines and this suffering and that suffering and tremendous fear and insecurity, because when the world is random, there's nothing to prevent random things from happening to anyone. The blessings, which say if you go in the natural way, then you will sleep without being afraid. You will be able to walk with confidence. You are in tune with nature, and therefore the world is going to be, protected. A beautiful article by a famous American rabbi, Rabbi Reuven Bolka, says that it's not just enough for the Jew to live in harmony with the Torah, but the Jew who lives in harmony with the Torah feels a need to bring harmony to the rest of creation. We are not in this just for ourselves. We're here for all of humanity. I'm reminded of the Talmudic story of the great Rabbi Meir, whose teacher had gone into apostasy. And Rabbi Meir was insistent when his teacher, his name was Acher, had died, that Acher still be judged in purgatory and then cleansed and allowed to enter the world to come. And Rabbi Meir said that when I die, if smoke comes out of Acher's grave, that means that I am interfering and he is being judged. So why did Rabbi Meir find it so important to preserve his teacher? His teacher, after all, had become a heretic. So why was Rabbi Meir so invested in him? Because that's the nature of a true Torah Jew, that they do not see the world as being, okay, that's them, that's there, I don't care, I'm going to do my own thing. The true Torah Jew feels the need to help the whole world achieve natural order, and thus peace, and thus harmony. And it could be that that's why God uses the number 7 in the rebuke to give us a hint, to help us out, that even in the rebuke we should realize that this is happening because we have become unnatural. But if we were to stay natural, then good things will happen. If we would remember the message of the 7, of the central connecting dot, then good things would happen. There's a rabbi who used to live here. He passed away last year. Rabbi Sinai Adler was a survivor of the Holocaust, and every year on the Saturday night after Parashat Behar, which would have been last week, he would have a Thanksgiving meal for his deliverance from the concentration camps. And I heard him once explain that he gained in strength from the Holocaust. How so? He says, because if you're standing around and all of a sudden you feel that you're being kicked from behind, it would be wrong to say that, it must be the wind, or there's just something in my pocket, or some accident, or whatever. A person would conclude that someone is kicking me. And so too he felt in the Holocaust, this is unnatural what is happening to us. It must be that God is behind the scenes, hidden in the number 7. we need not be afraid of what the whole world thinks. And the whole world can be going a little bit crazy. There was a testimony in Congress this past week where somebody from the administration was asked by a congressman, is it possible for a man to become pregnant and give birth? I had to watch this clip a few times to make sure that I heard correctly. This lady said, yes, a man can become pregnant and give birth. That is how absurd things have become. Now, this person, I don't think they missed school when this was taught. I understand why they said it, and I understand why they had to say it, because they've espoused a policy involving transgender, that if a woman decides that she wants to be a man, then she has to be referred to as a man. So therefore you can say that a man can become pregnant and give birth. I'm not discussing that complete issue. It's a very complicated issue. However, you see what that nature is under attack because of agendas. And so that's a problem. It's a serious problem. So the Jew has to realize that nature is with us. And we have to not be embarrassed about what we hold. We have to be careful and considerate. You're not allowed to insult someone. You're not allowed to say things that will cause someone tremendous trauma. But at the same token, you're not allowed to falsify what the Torah says, and certainly not to refrain from observing mitzvot because somebody else might laugh. And that is, I think, the message of our parsha, to be proud of our Torah, proud of our heritage, because this is the true nature of the world which God created by looking in the Torah. Shavua Tov.